Well, you know where those protesters should have been? Instead of at Passage Glacier with their stupid water guns, you guys made a mistake with that. Sorry, that was stupid.
As the conversation around over-tourism grows louder and louder, especially in cities like Barcelona, I wanted to take this opportunity to dive deeper into the role that cruises play in that debate. I'm currently sailing on the Azamara Onward on a scouting trip ahead of a hosted cruise I'll be leading next year around Spain and the entire Iberian Peninsula. And I couldn't think of anyone better to talk to than my friend and colleague, Dave Natale, better known in the travel world as the River Cruise King. With over 30 years of experience in the travel industry, Dave has personally taken over 250 cruises. He's already done 10 this year alone, and it's only June. He regularly hosts groups on both river and ocean cruises, and he even runs his own masterclass where he teaches other travel professionals how to build successful group trips and tours. Well, Dave, thank you very much for joining me as we talk about over-tourism and cruises.
It's the hot button topic at the moment.
Very much so. So before we get into all of that, if you can just introduce yourself, how you got into the cruise industry and got the name the River Cruise King.
Well, actually, you know, I started in hospitality and tourism when I was 16 years old working at Disney World. I was a waiter in Liberty Tree Tavern. Disney put me through high school and college, and I kind of wet my feet there. I started in the cruise industry working for a company called Cruises Only in Orlando way back in the day, back in the 1990s. And I worked there for a while. I then went on, I was working for one of the major cruise lines when I met a German and I up and moved to Europe. And I got over here, no idea what I was going to do. I actually worked in Frankfurt for a while as a consultant. But then I got the call back into travel and tourism, and I started a tour guide company up in Warnemünde, Germany, up on the Baltic, providing private day tours for people that didn't want to make that long trek into Berlin. And we got very big, very fast as far as, you know, our reputation. I wound up in Rick Steves' books, and yeah, and our tour was #1 at TripAdvisor for almost a decade till COVID came. But it was really funny because even though I had left the cruise selling world behind, as a tour guide marketing to cruise passengers, I was still kind of attached to it. And people would come on our tours, they'd spend 10 hours with us, and invariably at some point during the day, someone would say, "Dave, you've been on so many cruises. What do you know about river cruising?" And I would always joke, "That's our Holland America passengers going to die." Because, I mean, it was a terrible joke. But at that time, I had the impression, having lived near the Rhine, that river cruises were these boring things where, you know, folks who didn't want to travel anymore just kind of rolled on and watched the rivers go by. But the industry had been changing. Since I came out of the industry, the ships were getting bigger, and people had moved through all the itineraries. People had been cruising now through Europe and Alaska and the Mediterranean. They were looking for something new. So I looked around and I saw that the river cruise industry was emerging, and I just found a company I wanted to work with. I booked a group and I sent out an invitation to people who had gone on my tours, and I wound up selling 20 cabins in the first couple of weeks. And that turned into just something that multiplied and multiplied to where now my trips very now sell out entire river cruise ships. During COVID, I had to change my model a bit, and now I'm also back to doing ocean cruising. So I'm sponsoring 6 or 7 groups a year, and plus a little bit of private travel here and there. And so that's how it happened. Where the name came from, I had worked with AMA Waterways exclusively when I first started. And I think around trip number 55, I was at the bar in the ship with AMA owner Christine Karst one day, and she said, "Do you know, you have more AMA trips than any passenger, and maybe even me." And she said, "It's like you're the River Cruise King." And I went, "I'm stealing that." And I went home and I rebranded. So DNA Tours, which is my actual company, became known as River Cruise King. And so now I'm kind of balancing being king of the rivers, and I have to find a new title for the oceans.
Well, we got to throw on the oceans or the seas where we are right now.
Yeah.
Now, you're doing oceans, you're doing rivers, you're doing all sorts of different cruises.
Yeah.
And like I said before, the hot topic these days is the idea of over-tourism.
Yeah.
And what's happened, I mean, now more than anything, the big buzzwords are always Airbnb and everything like this.
And cruises.
And cruises, I feel like a couple years ago, that was when it was really the big buzzword. Can you talk a little bit about cruises, their impact on the local life and tourism, and how you see that?
I think it would be completely disingenuous to say it's not cruises. Of course, cruises are playing a role. But I think, like so many things in our world today, when people get upset about something, they find the easy target. Cruises are getting bigger and bigger. And that is a problem for small communities when these large ships come in. But it's much bigger than that. First of all, let's take Barcelona, where we live, as an example. So last year, Barcelona, I was just reading the other day, we had somewhere between 8 and 9 million visitors that stayed 2 nights or more
Okay.
in Barcelona. We had 3.5 million cruise visitors that came for the day. So that other 6 million people, where did they come from? Well, they came in by airplane. And what a lot of people have not been focusing on, the deregulation of the airlines and all these low-cost carriers have been inundating cities with far more tourists than the cities have ever had before. So, it's kind of like you're the product of your own, or the victim of your own success, as the airlines have invested heavily into places and they're bringing more and more passengers. At the same time, Airbnb starts, right? You've got tons of hotels, you've got Airbnb. But let's talk about how Airbnb works. Social media is a real culprit with over tourists. What was the word? Over touristification. You get your algorithm, you start looking at something, and suddenly you're just
You see more and more.
flooded with the same places, the same things, and like, oh, I want to go there. The algorithm funnels people to the same neighborhoods. And we were just talking the other day about Barcelona. My personal opinion about Barcelona is there's like a triangle of tourism: Sagrada Familia, Ramblas, and the Gothic Quarter. And everybody's flooding there. Why? Like, are there not other cool places in Barcelona to see? Of course there are. Like Camp Nou, which is the second most visited tourist spot in Spain, but mostly Spanish. But, there's so many other things to see, but people, their social media kind of programs them to go to these places.
Yeah, and then you stay with the familiar. So even if you've never been to, or you've been to a place, you feel a little bit more comfortable in maybe traveling to those same places. One, because you've seen it, and because you know kind of what to expect.
And you want that Instagram picture as well. And there's another part of this. The local governments, they're also victims of their own success. Years and years ago, I remember when Barcelona started really investing in their tourism advertising and their infrastructure, and they were making deals with cruise lines to come in, and they used all that money to totally rebuild and redo certain parts of the city. And now, it got away from them. The local governments have not kept up with proper zoning. There's way too many tourists concentrated in one area, and the internet and these social media and internet platforms, they've kind of taken the brakes off of the control of how many people are flooding into an area. Before, with zoning of hotels, you only had so many hotels in an area, so you could control how many tourists were coming in, or kind of overnight stays and transient visitors were coming in the neighborhood. Now you have no control, because they were just giving out licenses. And of course, there's a lot of people that don't use the licenses. There's good things about these platforms. It allows somebody who has an extra room in their house to participate in tourism. And that is a positive side.
Right.
And that's the other thing. The local governments are not talking about the positive things that tourism is doing. There's a lot of money that's flooding in that's being used for our social services and to expand our highways, and that they're not letting the people know, hey, okay, I know your streets are crowded, I know the buses are crowded, but we've done this, this, and this with these tourist dollars. So it's kind of a big problem that it has no easy solution, but good communication and understanding would go a long way to make people feel a little bit better. And I will also say, and this is, I have a lot of empathy for the people who are affected in these neighborhoods. I've been coming to Barcelona for 20 some years. I've watched places that I love, like Gracia, become unlivable. My friends lived there. I would come and, 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, you've got people in the streets and they're yelling and they're loud and they're drinking and they're peeing on the walls. And, this is where people live. So it becomes unbearable. And of course they get angry. What do you do?
Right, and it sounds like something that I've talked about in a lot of different videos is what you're getting at a little bit is the balance. There's the positives, there's the negatives, and we don't need to go maybe into so deep again about the things that are great, the things that aren't so great with all of this. But in terms of, there's obviously an impact. There's obviously some sort of impact on both sides. Can you talk a little bit about the difference that you've seen doing all these different cruises in the impact that river cruises have, the impact that more ocean and sea cruises have on those local communities?
Well, and that's something where the cruise lines really have to answer for. The large lines are getting these, they're building these ships, they're getting bigger and bigger. My first cruise I went on, the Oceanic Majestic back in, I think it was 1990. It had 800 passengers. The MSC World Europa, beautiful ship, it holds 5,000 guests. You got 3,000, 4,000 crew. That's just one ship.
And that's a lot of people coming in.
A lot of people. And when the city is allowing, multiple ships in a spot at one time, then of course it becomes untenable for the people that are impacted in those local areas. So they need to spread out the wealth a little bit. They need to limit the number of ships that can be in a port on any given day. They also need to take, their planning of infrastructure to attract the ships. Now they need to spread that out to other communities. And to be honest, as a travel agent, my clients are very interested in the road less traveled, so to speak. They're looking for the itineraries that are now starting to go to places that they've not heard of before. We went to Ceuta the other day.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, I had never heard of Ceuta before coming to Spain. I knew that Spain had a little protectorate area in Africa. I didn't know what it was called. I didn't ever think about going there. It was one of my highlights of this week. But we were the only ship there. It was, the impact was completely negligible on the local community. People were very happy to see us. It was like the days of old. The cruise lines, the local communities, and all of the people involved in this equation have to do a better job of spreading things out.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you were mentioning sending the cruises to other places, because one of the big pieces of news that came out a couple months ago, and especially with Barcelona, maybe not having all the cruise ships coming in or limiting the number of cruise ships that are going in, they're sending them to other places like Cadiz, for example. And there was a huge news article, and even on the news that came out, talking a little bit more about the fact that all these people in Cadiz saw such a great benefit of all these cruise lines coming in. I think there were 3 or something cruises that came in one day, and all the money that brought to the city. At the same time, there were others that were a little overwhelmed with the amount of people that were coming in. But it all goes back to that idea of the balance and things that we're talking about and how we can really adjust all of these things. But I want to kind of focus a little bit more on the criticisms that a lot of these cruise passengers receive.
Yeah.
Basic things, right, that you always hear over and over again. They don't spend very long in the city. And the big thing we were just talking about, they don't spend any money. What do you think about those?
I think there are fair points on both sides to it. Barcelona is unique in this discussion because Barcelona is not just a one-stop. The ship comes in the morning and leaves, and the people are only in Barcelona for that day. Barcelona is a starting and ending point for a huge number of the Mediterranean itineraries. So what a lot of the locals might not know is that a huge number of the cruise passengers that come to Barcelona for their cruise stay 2 and 3 nights. Mm-hmm. In those 2 or 3 nights, they're going to stay in the local hotels. They're going to hire local tour guides. They're going to go into the local restaurants. They're going to spend money on the local economy. And as a starting and ending stop, Barcelona does benefit. Rome, for example, is another one of the stops that is very heavily a beginning and ending point. So they're getting tourists that stay longer. Of course, there are a number of people that just flood in for the day and are gone, but they are spending money in the restaurants. So the question is, who owns the restaurants? Who owns the tour companies? Now, I make a very big point of talking with my clients about things like this. If they're talking to me about an Airbnb, especially the last couple of years, even before the protests began, I saw on my own that this is starting to have impacts on the neighborhoods. I remember when Airbnb started, I loved it because I loved to go and discover the neighborhoods and just hang out in the neighborhoods and sit in the cafes and watch real life. But as that became more and more and more and more, I started to see, even there in Gracia, where I used to go all the time, that, the local people were getting a little irritated because they would come to their favorite bar and there's like 30 tourists sitting there and they're like, that's my seat. So I do try to make my clients aware. I'm big on booking local, try and book local guides. I know that platforms like Viator are easy, but a little bit of research and you can work directly with the people so that the local people keep the money a little bit. Try to avoid, restaurants that have signs. Go down the side streets, spread the wealth, but most important, be polite. There is and has been for a long time, and this is something that drives me crazy. I call it the entitled tourist. They think, because I'm spending money here, I can do whatever I want. No, you cannot. You're still a guest in this person's city or town. The fact that you're spending money there, great. But a lot of these entitled tourists, they never turn the table on themselves. And I think it's super important to remember, travel is such an amazing bridge. It is there's so many positive things about it. When you go and visit a new country and you meet the people and you see, they're just like me in a lot of ways. We might speak differently, we might, dress differently or eat differently, but in the end, we all want the same thing. We want to be happy. We want our families to be happy. We want to live a good life. So tourists themselves can be a little bit more cognizant of what they're doing. And, we had to talk about types of tourists. Those low-cost air flights that are bringing in the hen parties and the stag parties and the party kids and stuff, that's what people are getting really angry about. The loud music, the loud nights, the people that are drunk in the streets, they're urinating in the streets, they're walking down the Ramblas in their bikinis. That's what people don't want. That's the thing that's making them mad. They're not mad at, the nice honeymooners that are, walking hand in hand and staring up at Sagrada Familia in wonder. They like those tourists.
Right.
So,
and it's something that it's a little tricky to handle as well, because as you were saying, there's a certain type of tourist that obviously nobody wants to see. The things that are not bringing positive impacts to the communities, to the cities and everything. But then you also always hear this idea of quality tourists, right? And I think a lot of times that gets mixed up with more money. And you think that someone with a higher economic living status is going to be a better tourist. But a lot of times what the issues now with over-tourism are driving up prices. So if we're having all of these, and I feel like Iceland is a perfect example of that, where they didn't want to have all of that low-cost tourism. So they raised the prices and everything started to kind of rise as well. So I think it's really tricky in terms of figuring out which kind of tourists they want. But one of the things that you touched on, I think, was really interesting, was, a responsible tourist or be a polite guest in a city. And I always hear that, and I feel like everybody always gives that same kind of recommendation or anything. If you had to say what would be a good example of being a responsible tourist, what things that people can do when they're visiting to show that, is there anything specific you could give?
Learning a few phrases of the local language never hurts.
Always
the
helps.
Pleases and the thank yous. Being polite, being courteous, not acting like the city is yours because you're there visiting it. That really comes down to the key. A smile goes a long way, and being polite goes a really long way, and people appreciate that. And, me being new to Barcelona as a Barcelona resident, I find, when I go into a place and I am respectful and, they see me with my, my fun Spanish, they love that. What they hate is the person that comes in and it's just acts so entitled. Leave your entitlement at home, people. Seriously, that's the thing.
Yeah. No, that's a great piece of advice, and obviously with the languages, it's always a big thing, and it really does kind of bridge that gap. What about the cruise ships specifically? Things like Azamara that we've seen. How are they doing things to make cruising and just the tourism more sustainable?
Well, one of the big topics is pollution.
Hmm.
Whether it's the pollution from the engines, pollution from that's generated on board. There's a real push to create better engines, better propulsion systems, things that are more environmentally friendly, and that goes for river and sea cruises. They're constantly looking for new ways to be better partners with the oceans. That's important. They're I've watched them really make big moves away from single-use plastics and to greatly reduce the trash and that kind of impact. Every little step is a good step. But again, remembering it's not just cruises.
Right.
Cruises are one small part of the whole vacation package. And if you think about the hotels that you go into, how many of them have those little, bottles of shampoo? We don't need those.
Right.
The thing on the side, the squeezy, give me some L'Occitane product in a squeezable bottle. I'm happy. But there's a lot of things like that. And that shift needs to happen over the whole travel industry.
Exactly.
And not just within the cruise industry.
And it's really interesting that you said that, because one of the big things, obviously, the pollution is probably the biggest impact in terms of just globally what's going on. But the Barcelona airport is talking about being amplified.
Yeah.
And that's one of the big things that I've been seeing, at least in my feeds and everything, with the news, of how much that is going to affect bringing in more people and the costs.
And
of
this is where the people in the local community also have to take responsibility. I've watched, I lived in Germany 23 years, so I'm all around Frankfurt, Berlin, up in Warnemünde, big towns, big cities, little towns. I've watched people sit back. They don't participate in the process, but they complain when they don't like the results. People have got to participate in those local discussions. So right now, they're talking about expanding the airport. Well, you know where those protesters should have been? Instead of at Passage Vastia with their stupid water guns, you guys made a mistake with that. Sorry, that was stupid. They should have been out at City Hall, and they should be at the airport, and they should be protesting about that expansion. Because as I mentioned before, this constant influx of low-cost carriers, that is as much a part of it. The other thing is, those same protesters also kind of go on vacation too. So they like those low-cost flights when they want to use them. So we're in a cycle that we're all a part of, and that's the other thing. It's not just you doing it, not you the tourist or you this, we're all a part of it. So, I know people that were at that protest. I know they're going to Costa Brava in August, and I know they're getting a rental apartment, and I gave them a little bit of a razz about it. But the point is to open the discussion. And that point, these protests have been effective because people are talking about it. They're thinking about it. Some people like us are thinking about it in a responsible, positive way. You have the jerks on the internet, oh, you can't, I'm not bringing my money to you. Well, shut up. So you have to be a participant in the discussion. You can't just be reactive. And so people need to get out and make their voices heard in a really constructive way, which means reaching out to the people who make the decisions. And think about where you're spending your money. You've got to spend your money on the places that are doing the right things.
Industry-wide, there's many things that need to change, not just with cruises, but even in the airlines and everything. But Spain is one of the top destinations in the world, and definitely in Europe. Last year it was number 2 behind all of France. What makes Spain such a great cruise destination?
Well, Spain's amazing. Spain, you're amazing. The people, you're amazing. The food, it's amazing. The history, the culture, the food, it's just all blended into these wonderful experiences. You can see so many different parts of Spain in one trip, which is why cruises are so popular, because people want to see, they want to see Barcelona, they want to see Malaga, they want to go up to Sevilla, they're like, oh, gimme. They want to go to Mallorca. There's something magical about it. And even more so in the summer, you have those wonderful long days like we're experiencing right now. there's an energy about Spain that invites you in. And, you know, the people are pretty awesome. They're very friendly. And if you're going to go on vacation, you want to feel good. Spain makes you feel good because the people make you feel good.
Yeah, and it's a great place, and that's
It really is.
one of the things that I wanted to have you here so we could talk a little bit while we're on the ship doing the scouting for the next year that I mentioned before, is because we're partnering up and we're going to be doing a trip all around the Iberian Peninsula, going from Barcelona all the way around to Bordeaux. It's going to be a 14-night cruise. It's going to be 5 different autonomous regions, technically 4 different countries, because we're going to be stopping not only in the different regions of Spain, but into Gibraltar, Portugal, and finishing up in France, right? And that's one of the big things I'm super excited to lead around and show people the local culture, show people all the different things that make Spain just so incredible, not only to me, but obviously, you know, things that we share in common.
Well,
But I worry that with this idea of over-tourism and all the news that people are hearing about, that some people might be skeptical about their impact and how they can kind of tie that in and make it feasible for them to go on a cruise like this. What do you think?
all right. Well, first of all, you've chosen an incredible itinerary. I mean, I worked in this industry a long time. I'm looking at itineraries from all the different lines all the time. And usually you're getting a taste here and a taste here. Azamara, their niche, their lane in the cruise world is creating these really great itineraries that give you extra long stays in the ports so that you're not, you know, you're not trying to see everything in 6 to 8 hours. You're here 10, 14, 12, 10, 12, 14 hours, even overnights. I think you have 3 multiple overnight stays on your itinerary. And you're really getting a chance to dive a bit deeper into the local area and explore without pressure. But what better way to go and discover a place if you're feeling uncomfortable about something? What better way than to do it with a professional who lives there, who lives, eats, breathes, and, you know, coming out of all of his pores is the love for this place. Someone who knows the right places to go and the right ways to go there and has, you know, great personal contacts, can walk into a restaurant and they're like, "Hey, Patrick," instead of, "Oh, tourist," you know? Why wouldn't you want to do that? So I think your idea is a brilliant one. And this week, as we've been sailing around on our little kind of test, it's been so much fun to put all the pieces together.
Exactly.
Because it's not just like going on a tour, it's understanding the timing of a day, you know? A lot of times people go on their trips, they do zero planning. They just show up and they're like, "I'm here, entertain me." And then they wind up making really bad decisions. They buy overpriced tours. They wander around and they're like, they walk down the most populated commercial street and they're like, "Oh, this is just like home." And they turn around and they go back. But you put so much time into understanding a place that you're putting that into what you're organizing and what you're going to offer to the guests that are traveling with you. So, I mean, having your own tourist curator concierge, that's gold.
Yeah, and what we did on this week was only really 5 cities. We've gone from Lisbon, we stopped in Seville, went to Ceuta, Malaga, and now heading back to Barcelona. Next year, it's the exact opposite way around. We're going Barcelona, Valencia, Cartagena, Malaga, Gibraltar, Seville, Lisbon, Porto, Bilbao, San Sebastian, finishing up in Bordeaux. But if we're gonna focus,
Dream itinerary.
I'm super
So
excited
great.
for it. But if we're gonna focus on just this week, what we did, if you had to pick, and I know you already mentioned Ceuta briefly, but if you had to pick just one port city that really stuck out to you, what would it be?
All right, I have to talk about Seville. Seville was absolute magic. And I remember there was a point as we were walking around and I'm like, "Patrick, okay, I've been coming to Spain for 20 odd years. I've been living in Barcelona for 2.5 years. I finally feel like I'm getting a taste of Spanish history in a way that I hadn't appreciated before." And that was such a beautiful evening too. You know, it was curated in such a nice way. We met that great tour guide that you had arranged for us, and he took us to his favorite places. So it was totally special. But walking around the cities, and of course, I hurt my back, everyone. I was in Alaska last week hiking, so I'm on my crutches, but just like marveling at everything and not caring about anything except wow.
And I mean, I think one of the great things, apart from seeing Seville and the Spanish kind of style to it, for next year is going to be all those different areas that are just so unique, and the best part about
Yeah.
just all of Spain. And next year, we've got 2 overnights in Seville, so there's more time to experience it, more time to really take in all the culture.
Well, the thing I loved about it is it wasn't just walking around and tasting food. It was all the discussions that came out of it.
Right.
Like we were talking about the World's Fair, and we were talking about Spanish history, and we were talking about Franco times, and we were talking about transitions. And being in these places with people that are truly connected to them and have a real appreciation for them, you're able to have deeper conversations than you would on, with just some guy from Viator. He was like, "That's our library." That's the cathedral.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that makes travel really expand beyond just going to a place. It becomes a real experience that you never forget.
Exactly. 100% agree with you on that one. Well, as the sun is going down on our last night on this cruise,
And I'm beautifully
unfortunately,
lit.
the lighting was perfect. You'll notice there's a bit of a difference as the video's gone along.
Another reason to love Spain, these beautiful sunsets.
And super long days
Yeah.
that we're gonna be taking full advantage of. Can I ask you just one final question?
Yeah.
One thing that you would just offer as kind of some advice for people that want to cruise, but be responsible at the same time.
Yes. Cruising is a great way to see a lot of places. And we had a discussion earlier that, about some people are a bit skeptical about cruising and this and that. Everything has positive and negatives. The thing that's so great about cruising is there is a cruise line and a cruise ship and an itinerary out there truly for everyone, from, the economic traveler to the people who, they want to just go big. There's something for everyone, but the one thing that retains in all of it, and I tell everyone this about my clients, remember to be kind. When you're in the airport and the person working behind the desk has to tell you something you don't want to hear, remember they didn't make that decision. They're just there doing their job. You can be in control of yourself. And if you travel with kindness and if you treat people with respect, that solves a lot of problems, whether you're on a cruise, whether you're flying in, whatever. Keep that as your guiding focus.
I like beautiful words for a beautiful night. I like that a lot. And I'd like to just kind of wrap things up there. Thanking you for your time. It's been a great way to just kind of understand a little bit more of not only the over-tourism and the impact that cruises can have, but just a little bit about the current status of the industry today. And I'm super excited for next year as we kind of get everything ready for the cruise. And if anybody wants to join, you guys now know that from next June 2nd to the 16th, we'll be traveling around from Barcelona all the way to Bordeaux, seeing everything that Spain has to offer on an amazing voyage.
It's going to be amazing.